Hello everyone. In honor of spooky season being upon us, we are going to be talking today about things that traumatized me as a child. It's going to be a bit of a different kind of video, but it's on a topic that I find quite interesting. And yes, this video is inspired by Wendigoon and Alex Kister, who did similar videos on things that traumatized them as children. And their videos kind of got me thinking and got me really fascinated with the idea of things that had that similar effect on me as a child. Obviously, I'm not as big into the horror scene as those two are, and so there's not really any stories that I can glean from these experiences of like, you know, this is what caused my fascination with horror in this aspect. I don't really have any stories like that, but I still think this is an interesting topic nonetheless. And I've tried to break these down into some sort of organizational structure so that the video will be a little bit more cohesive and that it will make sense. Whereas when I was writing all of these ideas down, it was more just like stream of consciousness, just me remembering things like obscure pieces of media or memories from years ago. And I won't be able to recall my precise age for most of these stories because they happened so long ago. It's safe to say that for all of these experiences, I was between the ages of like 2 and 10. Though there is one instance that we're going to talk about that I had in middle school, so a little bit past that age barrier. But for the most part, we're going to be sticking to childhood memories. The main point is that these will not be ordered in terms of age or what year the event took place, because truth be told, I just can't remember. The main topic of this video, and the main thing that I'm very fascinated with in this particular aspect of horror, is the thought of inexplicable trauma. Trauma, of course, being a very strong word in this case. I don't think any of these events necessarily traumatized me, but they were very scary. But the idea around inexplicable trauma is this concept of things that should not be scary, but in a weird and unexplainable way are terrifying, particularly to the mind of a child. And these pieces of media get bonus points if they were made for kids but somehow still managed to traumatize me. And in digging through the recesses of my memory for these stories and instances and pieces of media, I've come across memories that I have not thought about in years, like years and years. Stuff that I had completely forgotten had happened, or the stuff that I didn't remember existing. There are fears that led to certain behavioral patterns that started back then when I was a child, and some that even persist till the present day. And I've even discovered instances in my life, in my early childhood, that possibly led to the formation of me being an introvert, which is very interesting. I'm not a psychologist, but we'll get to that. And with all that said, thank you so much for watching, and we're gonna get into the video.
But first, a word from our sponsor. I'm on a mission to make content creation my job, and to do that, I need your help. In the description, there is a link to my Patreon where you can support me in exchange for benefits, as well as a link to my Twitch channel where you can support me through subscriptions and bits, as well as a PayPal if you're feeling generous. Thanks for listening to my speech, and we're gonna get back to the video.
We're going to start off by going over some pieces of media that I remember, like videos or shows or commercials that created this feeling of unease in me. And then once I'm done all of that, we'll go back and revisit just certain memories or instances as a child, not connected to media necessarily, that inspired this same feeling. We're going to start off with one of the more ridiculous ones from my childhood that scared me in an unexplainable and very bizarre way, and that was The Muppet Show. And to be clear, I actually really loved The Muppet Show growing up. My parents had these old DVDs of The Muppet Show, like the old Muppet Show, that I would watch constantly. And for anyone in the audience too young to know, DVD was the father of what we now know as Blu-ray. It also served as the grandfather for modern streaming services like Netflix. I'm not old, technology just developed faster. And for the most part, this show didn't really have that much of an effect on me. I mean, it had a positive one, like I enjoyed the show, but there were a few instances where I just felt this like inexplicable terror in response to what I was watching. I was too young to know concepts of like the uncanny valley or how things that are given human characteristics can cause feelings of like dread. And this show kind of set that off for me in a couple ways and in a few instances. For example, there was an old episode of The Muppet Show featuring American actor Joel Grey, and the very first act of the episode is performed by a series of Muppets in the dark called A Comedy Tonight. And there was something about the really like shady Muppets in this number in particular that made me very uneasy as a child, especially the now very popular character by the name of Crazy Harry. In reflecting on my old fears and unease regarding the Muppets, I think the deadly combination for me was Muppets with wide eyes, with large mouths, and pair that with the fact that, you know, being filmed decades ago, the quality was very low. Something about those three things in tandem made the show a little uneasy for me. See, the fun thing about inexplicable trauma is I don't have a good explanation for why I felt the things that I did. It clearly didn't drive me away from watching the Muppets because I kept doing that. But I always had to deal with in the back of my mind this constant unease of these characters with wide eyes and the huge mouths in the low quality video that it was. Especially when observing Muppets with wide eyes from far away, it looked like they had no pupils. Maybe that was it? I honestly don't know. In a similar vein, I also had trouble with the character of Animal, but only in specific circumstances. Most of the time, he was just really funny. He was totally fine for most of the time, but then there would be those instances where he like slowly turns to look at the camera and then his eyes widen. Like, I don't know, something about that. And there was another episode with another American actor by the name of Zero Mostel. And in one of his bits for the show, he delivers this huge monologue in the style of Edgar Allan Poe about him confronting his fears. And performance-wise, he was really into it. Like, he really committed to the bit of, like, you know, conveying dread and terror.
And I am here alone. And here I come some nights to confront my fears.
But for me as a child, his performance was a little too animated for me. There's one particular instance where the camera gets really close in on his face and his eyes widen unnaturally wide. And one of his eyes starts like twitching, and it just, I didn't like it. And one final thing I remember from the Muppet Show was some of the bigger Muppets on the show, the ones that would be piloted fully by humans in a costume. There was something about the way they moved and also how they animated the eyes that was very uncomfortable, but only in a few instances that I can remember. There's one bit in particular, I forget in which episode, where they're doing like a Sherlock Holmes style sketch, and the butler starts eating all the evidence in order to prevent them from realizing that he committed the murder. And something about the way that butler is animated, I don't know how they did it behind the scenes because there was a human piloting it, but the eyes were operated somehow. But it was very unsettling. I don't know why though.
Excuse me, miss.
Another thing that particularly terrified me in my early childhood was a show called Hippo Down the Drain. Now, I don't know anything about this show, and I never knew anything about this show as a child because I never made it past the opening, like, title sequence of the show. Hey everyone, it's Chris from the future here. I'm just in the middle of editing the video that you are currently watching. As you'll see, I made a quick correction in the edit just a little bit ago, saying that the show Hippo Down the Drain was actually called Hippo Tub Co. And I admittedly have gone down a little bit of a rabbit hole in regards to Hippo Tub Co. because apparently I didn't know this, but Hippo Tub Co. is what the internet has referred to as lost media, and that is media that is not commonly available. It can't be found on many sites or in the version that people may have seen originally. So in other words, Hippo Tub Co. is a nearly forgotten piece of media that the internet has slowly begun piecing together through old recordings or VHS tapes. And initially, this was just going to tie into the subject of childhood trauma, but honestly, I find this rabbit hole a little bit interesting, so I'm going to just expound for a little bit if you'll indulge with me. All of this information that I'm getting is from the Lost Media Wiki for Hippo Tub Co. But apparently this show initially aired on CBC in 2001. It did run until 2003, so maybe this is like an early childhood memory for me. And allegedly, they did produce a series of VHS tapes of the episodes of this show, but none of those VHS tapes have been found. However, someone managed to get a DVD copy of episodes 1 to 6 in the French dub, which is very interesting. The internet so far has only been able to find 13 24-minute episodes, or at least clips that imply the existence of 24 13-minute episodes. And only 4 of those 13 are in the original English. There's no real point to this tangent, I just find it quite interesting. Like, I initially was just talking about this as like an early childhood memory that like scarred me for a long time afterwards, and I'll give the explanation after this little tangent that I'm going on. But then it led me down this rabbit hole of lost media, like media from my childhood that I have a very clear visceral memory of, but that has slowly been forgotten by the internet over time, which is really quite interesting. So yeah, that's my whole rant. This is the whole rabbit hole that I've been going down. And back to your regularly scheduled program and why this program in particular traumatized me. So thank you, CBC. May this show never see the light of day again.
And that opening sequence is of the hippo, the protagonist of the show, being sucked down the drain in their bathtub. And this, for whatever reason, horrified me. This ignited in me a fear that lasted for years of being sucked down the drain whenever I took a bath. And obviously this made taking baths a bit of a chore, because for years following watching that one sequence, that one time, I always had to be fully out of the bathtub before the drain got like unplugged when I was taking a bath. And it all stems from that one time where I saw the opening sequence for a show that I'd never watched, and that managed to just cause years of paranoia and fear. Another thing that caused this feeling of dread in me was, of all things, a 2000s commercial for cinnamon rolls. I have looked for this commercial everywhere. I've tried everything in my power to try and find this commercial again, but I can't manage to find it. In the commercial, the actors are eating cinnamon rolls, and then suddenly every circular object in the environment around them turns into a cinnamon roll. And the camera then cuts back to the actors, whose eyes have transformed into these rotating, swirling cinnamon rolls. And this commercial ignited in me a very long-lasting fear of people with swirly eyes and hypnosis by proxy. And I can confirm, as a result of that commercial, I have had at least one nightmare, or I had at least one nightmare in my childhood of being chased by these like brainwashed people whose eyes were like swirly like the ones in the commercial. I'm pretty sure it was like a zombie apocalypse situation where they were trying to make me like them. There's one particular shot in this commercial where I think this is right before the reveal of the swirly eyes, where they look up at a Ferris wheel because they're at a fairground, and the Ferris wheel is just one giant swirling cinnamon roll, and then it cuts back and their eyes are all like that. So I'm pretty sure childhood me thought that the swirling cinnamon roll Ferris wheel, like this giant swirling cinnamon roll, had somehow brainwashed the actors, and that's why their eyes were like that. The commercial probably wasn't that deep, but to me as a child, I thought that was what had happened. And so in the nightmare, these like brainwashed, like eye swirling cinnamon roll zombies were like trying to pull me towards the Ferris wheel so that I would be forced to like look at it and, you know, become like them. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. So yeah, shout out to like
late 90s, early 2000s commercial directors for giving me nightmares. Very cool, very fun. And for the last piece of media that I can remember having a similar effect on me as a child, we're gonna have to skip ahead in my life quite a few years. Specifically to the age where my dad decided that me and my brother were old enough to watch Lord of the Rings for the first time. And to be clear, I loved The Lord of the Rings when we first watched it, and I've loved it ever since. It's one of my favorite trilogies of all time. Probably, it's in the top 3 for sure, maybe top 2, honestly. And there's one particular aspect in that whole trilogy that I don't think it gave me nightmares, but it made me uneasy in the same way that like the Muppet Show did when I was like way younger. Like I remember watching the Fellowship of the Ring for the first time, and my dad warning me like, just so you know, the orcs in Lord of the Rings look kind of scary. Now obviously I was very young at this point, so it was fair of him to warn me about that. But honestly, the orcs didn't bother me when I watched this movie for the first time, or this trilogy for the first time. See, the main thing that creeped me out about the trilogy was a scene from Return of the King, where Frodo, Sam, and Gollum are walking through the dead marshes. And when I first watched this scene, I closed my eyes for most of the scene, I'll be honest, which, fair enough. It was the sequence in the dead marshes where Frodo gets like pulled under the water and he starts to see these like ghostly apparitions around him, like reaching out and grabbing him, these very spooky looking like corpse faces. Childhood me did not like that, not at all. I don't know really why I thought it was scary. This is gonna go on a bit of a tangent, but I'll tie it back into what I'm talking about. But I remember in my elementary school, and I don't know why this book was in my elementary school, but there was a book in my elementary school library on death. Like, for the most part, it was just talking about, like, you know, the death cycle of animals and insects and stuff like that. But there was one section of this book on death in my elementary school library that had photographs of like the victims of the Franklin expedition, like these people who were mummified by the Arctic elements around them. I'm not sure why my elementary school even had this book, because kids should not be seeing those pictures. But I go on this tangent to say that clearly I didn't have a problem with death as a child. If anything, I was kind of like morbidly curious about it when I was that age. But for some reason, this sequence in the dead marshes was a little too much for me, despite all of that. So yeah, not sure why that was inexplicably horrible for me. Maybe it reminded me of that book. Maybe that book had more of an effect on me than I thought. I don't actually know. It's so weird talking about this like morbid curiosity I had as a child on the internet. Don't go looking for pictures of dead bodies. That's weird. Don't do it. Learn from my mistakes. Don't give yourself nightmares. But if you want, we're just gonna end that bit there. So those are all of the pieces of media that I can remember that caused this feeling of like inexplicable dread and horror in me as a child and a little bit older. But before we end the video, I want to also touch on memories that aren't linked to pieces of media that gave me that very same feeling, and some memories that may have inspired certain behaviors that I hold to this day. This first experience happened when I was a baby. I'm not sure what age I was, but I was like stroller age, like, or however old you are when you are like wheeled around in a stroller. And I only have vague memories of this, but my parents remember it quite well. See, as a child, I was taken with my family and I believe some friends to the zoo. And there was a pen in that zoo that held a bunch of like turkeys. I don't know why there were turkeys in a zoo, but there were. Unless this was not a zoo and I just think it was a zoo. Anyway, I was exposed to turkeys as a child. And all that happened in that encounter is that the turkeys started gobbling really loudly right next to me, And I just like sobbed for like a little child for the rest of the time we were at the zoo. For me as a child, I'm just hearing this like really loud noise like attack my ears something that I've never heard before. And so I was just inconsolable for the whole day afterwards. See, I don't think it was the noise itself that like traumatized me, but I think it was like the volume of the noise. Because I feel like as a child, your ears are a lot more sensitive, and then this thing's like right in my ear, basically. And obviously, I'm not a psychologist, so this is just speculation on my part, but this may have led to my aversion to loud noises that I still have to this day. I don't like loud noises, which may have led to me being the introvert that I am today, where I just don't actively seek out loud situations or loud places. And to this day, I am still uncomfortable in like extremely loud environments or when sudden like extremely loud noises occur. Now, of course, I can't diagnose this event as being the reason for how I am, but it's still fun for me to speculate. And the final memory that I want to touch on, which I don't necessarily think is inexplicable trauma, but it caused a lasting effect that I've never experienced before and is so weird that I just had to talk about it. And that is a very weird fever dream that I experienced while I was in middle school. See, in the dream, all I was doing was I was just laying in my bed with my eyes open, staring at the roof of my bedroom. And at this point in my life, I had one of those like IKEA bunk beds where like the top bunk is a bed, but the bottom bunk is a desk space. So like I was roughly like maybe 3.5 feet away from the roof of my bedroom. And all that the dream was as I was staring at the roof of my bedroom, this weird optical illusion started to happen where the roof was simultaneously like raising and getting further away, but also collapsing in on me at the same time. It was this weird layered perspective where it felt like it was getting further away and getting closer. I felt claustrophobic, but also like expanded in a way. It was so weird. And the whole time I'm experiencing this illusion, the whole thing gave me this extreme sense of what I think was vertigo. I'm not sure it was vertigo. I'd never really experienced it until that point, if that's what it was. But it had a lasting effect on me. And from that point on to this very day, certain things or actions I perform in my life will recall that same feeling of vertigo in me for no apparent reason. One of the main things that did this, especially like in the months after that dream, was in middle school there were a lot of like assignments where you had to like create like a poster board of something that you learned, or like a science fair where you're like drawing big letters to, I don't know, create an illustration or something. But something about drawing big letters on an open canvas started to bring back those same feelings in me, and I cannot explain it because those events are not similar at all. But I don't know, it just happened, and it's so weird. It's like these wires getting crossed in my brain being linked for no apparent reason, seemingly. The feeling's gone away over time, like it's dimmed a lot since I first had that dream in middle school, but I do still somewhat get that feeling when something like that happens, when you're drawing like big letters on a canvas or something. That doesn't really tie into inexplicable horror or inexplicable trauma, but I had to talk about it in this video because it's so weird. And when am I gonna get the chance to talk about that, right? And to my memory, that is the end of the list of media and memories from my life that created feelings of inexplicable horror for me. And so if you stuck around this long and listened to my rant for this long, thank you so much for watching. And of course, a big shout out to the patrons, Sean, and my top tier patrons, RD and Snowy. Thank you all so much for your support. It means the world that you are helping me to be able to do this full time, talk about things that I find interesting for you all. And it's been really fun. And that's pretty much it. We are on the road to 400 subscribers, and every subscribe helps. So if you like what you saw and you like the videos that you see on this channel, consider subscribing and liking the video. Do all the things that YouTubers tell you to do. I keep forgetting to do all those things, but I feel like if you like the video, you'll just do it without me having to tell you. And I've got a very exciting video planned for you all that will release on October 31st, which is a Tuesday this year. So next week's video is just going to be a teaser trailer for the big video that will be dropping on October 31st. I hope you're excited for what I have in store for you then, because I know that I am. And cut.